An army's commitment to its equipment is a factor that determines not only its combat capability but also its honor. In some cultures, it is considered a matter of honor for an army to own and protect its equipment. If an army fails to protect its equipment and loses it to the enemy, loses it to enemy, this is considered a serious disaster and is called a breach of honor in the military literature. The Russian armed forces have faced such a situation several times in the past, and the Ukrainian armed forces have repeatedly managed to capture tanks and equipment belonging to the Russian army. An army's commitment to its equipment is a factor that determines not only its combat capabilities but also its honor. In some cultures, it is considered a matter of honor for an army to own and protect its equipment. If an army fails to protect its equipment and loses it to the enemy, this is considered a serious disaster and is called a breach of honor in the military literature. The Russian armed forces have faced such a situation several times in the past, and the Ukrainian armed forces have repeatedly managed to capture tanks and equipment belonging to the Russian army. In recent days, the capture of a Russian tank by the Ukrainian armed forces caused a stir in the Russian public opinion. As the footage was shared on social media, reactions, especially from extreme Russian nationalists and the war supporters, have increased against Vladimir Putin's administration. How this incident took place and the initial reactions of the public opinion in Russia have become a matter of curiosity. Let's analyze these developments together. So as the Pioneer team, we continue to bring you developments regarding the Russia-Ukraine war. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss our daily reports. You can also support me and my team by using the super thanks button below the video. So let's start if you're ready, because the Pioneer reports. So the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine is rapidly pulling the world into the center of the conflict. It is considered one of the biggest armed struggles of the 20th century, filling the world with fears of a potential world war. In particular, the Russian Federation's growing threat perception on the global scale is heightening tensions across the globe. However, even Russia's escalation of the threats does not mean that these threats will be effective. This is because the Russian Federation faces a number of domestic issues that it must first resolve. For example, it has to deal with the serious problems such as the flight of its soldiers from the front line. Such desertions of the Russian soldiers represent a situation that calls into question Russia's combat power and discipline and undermines its internal order. The reports of Russian soldiers deserting from the front lines have become a commonplace. However, there are some noteworthy aspects of this flight. Normally, when an army decides to withdraw, it withdraws with all the equipment and gear, and there is no talk of the army suffering a defeat or casualties. In this case, however, the situation is much clearer because, according to reports, until the Russian armed forces literally fled the front line after the recent clashes with Ukrainian troops. They even reported left a large amount of ammunition, including a tank, to the Ukrainian troops during the escape. With the emergence of the allegations of the incidents near Terni, the complexity of these intense conflicts in the region has once again come to the fore. The fighting around the Terni has been going on for a long time, and this line of conflict is notable for the fact that both sides have been unable to gain a decisive advantage despite using their vast resources. Although the Russian army is conducting an intense offensive with its air force and artillery, the determined resistance of the Ukrainian armed forces continues with similar intensity. The 12th Azov Assault Brigade of the Ukrainian armed forces was one of the frontline units fighting against the Russian offensives on the ground. According to reports, this unit was subjected to an intense attack by the Russian army, and the Russian armed forces were attempting an advance supported by artillery shelling and airstrikes. However, the defenders of the Ukraine's defensive positions, who had relatively limited means, resisted this fierce fighting. Moreover, Russian troops were constantly receiving support during these battles, and therefore the Russian troops had no excuse not to claim victory. As the situation became more critical, the tension increased when the convoy advanced towards the Russian troops, and this signals a tough fight for the brave defenders of the 12th Azov Assault Brigade. However, the 12th Azov Assault Brigade was determined not to allow the Russian army to make any new advances in the area. Therefore, a detachment of the brigade launched a new offensive, advancing towards the forward lines. The target was a convoy supporting the Russian army, and the targeting of which would severely reduce the strength of the Russian army. The small Ukrainian contingent carried out a successful maneuver, trapping the convoy in a gorge. According to reports, the Ukrainian armed forces units were actively supported by the unmanned aerial vehicles during conflict, and this strategic move played a critical role in cutting off assistance to the Russian armed forces troops. With the targeting of several targets in the convoy was disorganized and its progress was disturbed. This made escape almost impossible due to the disorganization of the convoy, and as a result, the units of the Ukrainian armed forces achieved a significant success by blocking the flow of support for the Russian army. So now the main battle on the front line was at the front. The offensives of the units of the Russian armed forces was quite intense, but they needed constant reinforcements to sustain this offensive. During the rapid counter-attack by units of the Ukrainian armed forces, the Russian troops did not receive the necessary reinforcements, so they had to continue their offensives with the available ammunition. However, this continuous offensive eventually had to stop. The reason was the lack of ammunition for the Russian troops, and the Russian troops had to retreat, or miraculously they were started to flee. They did not have enough ammunition, which made it impossible for them to continue their offensives. As mentioned at the beginning of our report, there is a distinct difference between fleeing and retreating. Units of the Russian armed forces officially fled from this area. During this flight, Ukrainian soldiers captured a Russian tank, several armored vehicles, and unused ammunition. The Russian soldiers violated one of the most basic rules of the military service, and according to the military literature, suffered a serious loss of honor. And the 12th Azov Brigade issued statements after the attack, and the brigade made the following statement. Intelligence detected an armored group of Russians. This group was advancing towards the defense forces' positions in the Crimea area, and the soldiers of the 12th Azov Brigade and the 19th Air Assault Brigade destroyed the enemy column. Troops and crews of the enemy vehicles fled, leaving their equipment behind. Later, Azov fighters recovered and damaged the Russian tank from the battlefield. It is clear that the Russian troops suffered a major defeat near Cherny, and it is clear that this defeat cannot be hidden. It is now generally accepted that the Russian statements and propaganda are lies, and the successful resistance of the Ukrainian army is frustrating the Russian leadership's efforts to hide the truth, and Putin's domestic political difficulties are being exacerbated by the revelation of these facts. So what do you think? Do you think the defensive operations carried out by the Ukrainian armed forces are sufficient in the face of the Russian aggression? Does the flight of the Russian army from the front line indicate a serious weakness in Russia's military strategy? Let me know in the comments. I'm really interested in the comments. I really want to know your answers, and I read and I care a lot about all of them. Have a nice week.